Fort Worth, Texas, September 2nd, 21. Firefighters rush to a blazing dumpster on the city's west side. To them, it looks like another routine call, a contained fire in an industrial area. But as the smoke clears and the flames die down, they make a discovery that will change everything. Inside the charred metal, among the ashes and twisted remains of trash bags, are human bodies. Not one, not two, but three, burned, dismembered, almost unrecognizable. It is a sight so brutal that even the most seasoned investigators will never forget it. The bodies are soon identified as David Luera's, a man known locally with a troubled past, Lauren Phillips, a young woman with her life ahead of her, and Mara Cruz Mathis, another innocent caught in the path of something far darker than anyone could have imagined. Their final moments, investigators would later learn, were filled with terror, strangled, dismembered, set on fire. What began as a fire investigation quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Detectives realized they weren't looking at a random act of violence. This was deliberate. This was ritualistic.
The burn marks under a dumpster that was set on fire about 6 a.m. Wednesday. Police hauled it away as evidence. Inside, firefighters made a horrible discovery. 3 people, a young woman who was maybe in her teens, a child, gender unknown, and a man. He is identified as 42-year-old David Lueras. Detectives are asking for help identifying the other 2. Police say they were all dismembered, and some body parts are still missing.
And it's apparently pretty gruesome since they didn't even know how many were there initially.
Andrew DeJong showed up to work that morning and saw the heavy police presence.
They blocked off this whole section of the street, and I had to convince the cop just to let me in here to work. And I saw probably 3, maybe 4 dozen people here, and probably a dozen or more cars.
People who live around here are horrified.
This street is always something going on.
Olga Vasquez lives almost right across the street in the 3100 block of Bonnie Drive.
Even, way before I was scared to live in here, and now it's like I had to think about it to stay here. It's just a lot. Yeah. I had 2 kids, teenagers.
Police say Lueras had ties to Dallas and to northeastern Tarrant County. He had a long criminal record, including drug charges, but police aren't speculating who would have wanted him dead or why. For 3 days, Fort Worth police kept the gruesome crime quiet, declining to give even basic information. Now they're asking for the public's help to solve it. In Fort Worth, Scott Gordon, NBC5.
And the man behind it all was hiding in plain sight. His name was Jason Thornburg. To neighbors, he seemed quiet, a little strange but harmless. In reality, he was a self-proclaimed spiritual seeker, driven by delusions of sacrifice and purification. A man who believed killing was his calling, a man who admitted to consuming human flesh, burning bodies, and carrying out what he described as sacred offerings. But how did a seemingly ordinary man become one of Texas's most disturbing killers? How many victims did he really claim? And what twisted belief system fueled? This is the story of darkness hidden in plain sight. A story of lives stolen, families shattered, and evil disguised as devotion. Before the flames, before the bodies in the dumpster, before his name became synonymous with horror, Jason Thornburg was just another man living on the edge of Fort Worth. To the outside world, he was unremarkable, almost invisible, but inside, he carried a darkness that had been building for years. Born in Arizona, he grew up in a life that seemed ordinary on the surface, yet underlying patterns of isolation and obsession hinted at the darkness to come. Those who knew him described him as quiet, awkward, and distant, a man who floated on the periphery of social circles, always searching, always restless. He became deeply fascinated by the Bible, not for comfort, but for his own twisted interpretations. He spoke of sacrifices, purification, and signs that only he claimed to understand. By 21, Thornburg was living in a modest Fort Worth apartment. To his neighbors, he was simply eccentric, a quiet loner. Few could have guessed that inside that apartment, he harbored compulsions so dark they would lead to multiple murders. His obsession with ritual and religious delusion would soon become deadly, culminating in acts of violence that no one could ignore. The first known victim of Jason Thornburg was Tanya Begay, a 36-year-old Navajo woman. In March of 2017, Tanya went out in Gallup, New Mexico, and spent time with Thornburg, a man she believed to be a harmless companion. He would later confess that he strangled Tanya, dismembered her, and scattered her remains across the New Mexico desert. Tanya's body has never been recovered, leaving her family in anguish for years. Her disappearance remained a cold case until Thornburg's eventual arrest. Tanya was more than a statistic. She was a mother, a daughter, a life full of laughter and love, stolen by a man who believed her death was a divine command. Her murder marked the beginning of a pattern that Thornburg would repeat, refining his rituals and delusions with each act. By May 21, Thornburg had escalated his crimes. His next victim was his own roommate, 61-year-old Mark Jewell. Mark was a quiet man who had opened his home to Thornburg, unaware of the danger he harbored. Thornburg later admitted that he believed Mark carried evil and that his death was necessary. He strangled Mark, dismembered his body in the apartment, and burned the remains, erasing almost all evidence. Mark Jewell's murder represented a dangerous shift. Thornburg was no longer preying on strangers. He was striking close to home, showing a growing confidence and obsession with his ritualistic acts. On September 2, 21, the city of Fort Worth would wake to a nightmare. Behind an industrial building on Bonnie Drive, a dumpster fire was reported. What firefighters discovered inside was far worse than smoke and ash. It was evidence of a massacre. Inside the dumpster were dismembered human remains, not one body, not two, but parts of 3 different people. The scene was so gruesome, even veteran investigators were shaken. Who could commit such violence, and why? Forensic teams quickly worked to identify the victims. The first was 42-year-old David Luaris, a man known to Thornburg as a friend. David had been staying with him in recent weeks. The second victim, 33-year-old Lisa Saiz, was a woman David brought along, perhaps unaware she was walking into a death trap. The third was 91-year-old Lupe Saiz, Lisa's elderly mother, who had come to check on her daughter. None of them would leave Jason's apartment alive. Jason Thornburg later told detectives that he believed all 3 were sacrifices. In his warped interpretation of Scripture, he claimed they were chosen by God. David, someone he had known for years, was allegedly the first target. After killing him, Thornburg turned to Lisa. He then made the chilling decision to take the life of Lupe, an elderly woman who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thornburg admitted he killed each victim by cutting their throats, then dismembered their bodies in the bathtub of his Fort Worth apartment. With disturbing calm, he described how he methodically placed the remains into plastic bins, transporting them to the dumpster behind the business complex. And as if that wasn't enough, he set the contents on fire, an attempt to destroy the evidence, to erase his crimes in smoke and ash. But fire doesn't erase everything. What Thornburg left behind was undeniable proof of his ritualistic killings. Within days, investigators pieced together the victims' identities. Each discovery ripped through their families like an open wound. A son, a daughter, a mother, all gone in the most violent, unimaginable way. Detectives knew this was not random violence. The sheer brutality, the methodical dismemberment, it suggested ritual, obsession. When they traced the victims back to Thornburg's apartment, the picture became horrifyingly clear. On September 28, 21, Jason Thornburg was arrested. During interrogation, he confessed in chilling detail. He admitted to the murders of David, Lisa, and Lupe. He described the killings as necessary sacrifices, saying he was following a higher command. And then, almost casually, he told investigators these weren't his only victims. Thornburg confessed to 5 murders in total, including Tanya Begay in 2017 and his roommate Mark Jewell earlier in 21. The dumpster killings, however, revealed his escalating boldness. He was no longer hiding in secrecy. He was killing in clusters, leaving behind a trail of devastation impossible to ignore. David Luaris, Lisa Saiz, Lupe Saiz. 3 lives brutally ended, 3 families shattered. Their murders forced the city of Fort Worth and the nation to confront the horror of Jason Thornburg's rituals. For investigators, the case was like staring into the abyss of pure delusion. A man who believed he was carrying out divine will, yet was nothing more than a killer driven by darkness. The dumpster murders marked the peak of Thornburg's spree, but they also marked the end, for it was here that his secrets burned into the open, and law enforcement finally brought his reign of terror to a close. 6 days after the dumpster murders, investigators closed in on their prime suspect. Surveillance footage had linked Jason Thornburg's vehicle to the dumpster where the bodies were found. The quiet man who lived in a small apartment on Galmetto Drive was suddenly the center of a homicide investigation. On September 28, 2021, Jason Thornburg was arrested. But what shocked detectives wasn't just the crimes they suspected him of, it was how easily he spoke about them once he was in custody. In the stark silence of the interrogation room, Thornburg did not protest. He did not beg or deny. Instead, he leaned forward and began to talk. For hours, detectives listened as he confessed to murders in chilling detail. Thornburg described his killings as though he were recounting errands. Tanya Begay in 2017, his roommate Mark Jewell earlier in 2021, and then the 3 victims whose remains had filled the dumpster fire. To him, each was chosen. Each was necessary. Seasoned investigators, men and women who had heard confessions to the worst crimes imaginable, were unsettled. Thornburg didn't sound angry or guilty or even proud. He sounded faithful, as if he truly believed he had been carrying out divine will. Step by step, he explained the pattern. First, he would identify his victim, someone he believed carried evil within them. Then, he strangled or cut their throat. Afterward, he dismembered the bodies, burning or scattering remains as part of the ritual. To him, it was cleansing. To detectives, it was calculated brutality. Thornburg spoke of his actions with a detached logic. He admitted to feeling compelled by Scripture, saying God demanded sacrifice. He claimed he was chosen as an instrument of divine judgment. But in that cold room, the reality was clear. He wasn't a prophet. He was a predator. With every word, Thornburg handed detectives the key to building a case. His confession tied him to at least 5 murders across 2 states. Yet what chilled everyone in that room was his lack of remorse. When asked if he regretted what he had done, Jason simply shook his head. There was no sorrow in his eyes, only conviction. In his confession, Jason Thornburg confirmed what many already feared. The man sitting quietly before them wasn't driven by rage or impulse. He was driven by belief, a distorted, deadly faith that had left 5 innocent people butchered in its wake. For law enforcement, it was both a breakthrough and a nightmare. They had their killer, but his calm explanations left an unnerving question lingering in the air. If he hadn't been caught, how many more sacrifices would Jason Thornburg have made? Jason Thornburg's actions were not random acts of violence. Experts examining his case describe him as a calculated, ritualistic killer, driven by a delusional belief system that combined religious obsession with psychopathy. He was meticulous, calm, and, chillingly, fully aware of the consequences of his actions. According to forensic psychologists, Thornburg's motives were rooted in a distorted interpretation of Scripture. He believed that murder, dismemberment, and even cannibalism were acts of divine purification. To him, the victims were not people, they were instruments for a higher purpose, sacrifices that fulfilled a perceived spiritual mandate. Thornburg's murders followed a predictable pattern: selection, strangulation, dismemberment, ritual consumption, and disposal by fire. This consistency revealed a mind obsessed with control and ritual. Unlike impulsive killers, he planned every step, viewing each act as both duty and devotion. In the end, Thornburg's psychology illustrates a terrifying reality. A man whose faith, twisted by delusion, became a blueprint for murder, turning belief into brutality and obsession into death. In 2024, Jason Thornburg's crimes reached the courtroom. For months, the city of Fort Worth had waited for justice, and inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Families of the victims sat in stunned silence, clutching photos, holding onto the memories of those stolen from them. Thornburg's defense argued insanity. They claimed his delusions made him incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, pointing to his obsession with scripture and ritual. They painted a picture of a man trapped in his own distorted reality, but the prosecution was unyielding. The prosecution presented a chilling narrative. They described the murders in meticulous detail: strangulation, dismemberment, ritual consumption, and the burning of remains. They emphasized the planning, the execution, and the deliberate steps Thornburg took to cover up his crimes. His calm demeanor, they argued, proved he understood his actions and chose to commit them anyway. Witnesses, including forensic experts and investigators, recounted the horrors of the dumpster murders, the disappearance of Tanya Begay, and the death of Mark Jewell. Each testimony added layers to the picture of a man methodical in his killing, obsessive in his rituals, and devoid of remorse. Even in the courtroom, Thornburg's words chilled all who heard them. The jury faced the difficult task of weighing cold, deliberate murder against claims of mental illness. They listened to the victims' families describe the lives lost, the laughter, the love, and the future stolen. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came. Jason Thornburg was found guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder. The families, while heartbroken, felt a measure of relief. Justice had been served, but the emotional scars would never heal. The courtroom bore witness not just to a man's crimes, but to the devastating impact on every life he touched. This trial would forever be remembered as a confrontation with pure, calculated evil, and a reminder of the resilience of those left behind to tell the stories of those who could no longer speak for themselves. In 2024, after weeks of harrowing testimony, the court delivered its final judgment. Jason Thornburg, the man who had committed ritualistic murders across years, was sentenced to death.
We have some breaking news to get to right now. A decision in the Jason Thornburg case has been made, and this is about whether he will get the death penalty or not for killing 3 people in Euless.
Let's go ahead and listen in.
Jason Allen Thornburg, you have been adjudged by a jury to be guilty of capital murder, and the juror has answered the special issues, making it mandatory that your punishment be death. Therefore, this court sentences you, Jason Allen Thornburg, to death. The clerk of this court shall no later than the 10th day after this court enters its order setting the date for execution, issue a warrant under the seal of this court for the execution of the sentence of death, which shall be directed to the Director of the Correctional Institutions Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice at Huntsville, Texas, commanding the Director to proceed at the time and place named in the order of execution to carry the same into execution. This sentence shall be executed at any time after the hour of 6 p.m. on the day set for the execution by intravenous injection of a substance or substances in a lethal quantity sufficient to cause death and until you, Jason Allen Thornburg, are dead.
So we're just hearing the instructions from the judge as he is now reading out the verdict that came back from the jurors. Jason Thornburg, in fact, being sentenced to death following his conviction for killing 3 people in Tarrant County.
The decision brought a measure of closure, but not relief, to the families who had endured years of pain and uncertainty. The judge's words were firm, each murder deliberate, each act methodical, each crime deserving the harshest penalty under the law. Yet, for those who had lost loved ones, no sentence could restore what was taken. No punishment could bring back David Lueras, Lauren Phillips, Maricruz Mathis, Tanya Begay, or Mark Jewell. The void left by their absence remained a permanent scar. One family member of a victim summed it up quietly outside the courtroom. This doesn't bring them back, but at least now, he can never hurt anyone again. The words captured the mixture of grief and relief that echoed through the Fort Worth community. The aftermath of Thornburg's crimes extended far beyond the courtroom. Friends, neighbors, and the community struggled to process the horror that had been hiding in plain sight. Awareness campaigns on missing persons were strengthened, local law enforcement reviewed past cold cases, and mental health resources were highlighted, an effort to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. Yet, perhaps the most important legacy is remembrance. David, Lauren, Maricruz, Tanya, and Mark are more than names on a case file. They were sons, daughters, friends, mothers, fathers. Their lives, stolen in the cruelest of ways, are honored in memory, in the lessons learned, and in the vigilance of a community forever changed. Jason Thornburg would face the consequences of his actions, but the true impact of his crimes, loss, grief, and shattered lives, would live on. In the hearts of those left behind, and in the quiet corners of Fort Worth, the story of darkness, ritual, and loss remains a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of those who survive. But this story is also about the people left behind, the families who woke up to emptiness, who searched for answers, and who faced the horrific truth years later. Their grief is immeasurable, yet their resilience shines through. In remembering the victims, we honor their lives, not for the way they died, but for the love they shared, the laughter they brought, and the memories they created. Jason Thornburg believed his actions were righteous, a form of devotion, but the law, society, and justice reminded him and the world that no delusion can justify murder. His convictions and death sentence bring accountability, yet they cannot undo the pain, the fear, or the lives lost. They are a stark reminder of the cost of obsession and the fragility of human life. In the end, the darkness left by Thornburg cannot overshadow the light of the victims' lives. David, Lauren, Mara Cruz, Tanya, and Mark remain in the hearts of those who love them. Their stories teach us vigilance, compassion, and the enduring strength of humanity in the face of incomprehensible evil. This is a story of horror, loss, and ultimately remembrance. A reminder that even in the shadows, the light of life, love, and memory endures.